Joining me now is Republican Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Senator Sullivan, welcome back to
Chuck,
the press.
good to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Look, you have said he was your mentor, Senator McCain, became a friend. He sort of put his arm around you when you got elected.
Early on, very early on.
And he's nominated you to replace him as head of the International Republican Institute that goes out there and promotes democracy. The vision that John McCain, I think, was trying to lay out for people yesterday. What did you take away from the service?
Well, first of all, I thought it was a beautiful service, and first, more than that, my condolences to the McCain family, Cindy McCain, the children. I think that they showed great grace, strength, dignity, and I think the service, really the whole week, has been about unity. There's been, as you mentioned at the outset, some discussion about the tension between President Trump and John McCain. But this notion of unity is really what I've been seeing. And it's unity behind the values of a great American. And that's John McCain, courage, someone who loved freedom. You know, he loved freedom probably more than anybody because he had it taken away. That's right. Service to our nation. And mentorship, as you mentioned at the outset with me. You know, it's not just me, but Democrat and Republican senators. So I thought it's been a very, very important week to kind of look at these values that he represented. He wasn't a perfect man. He's the first one to admit that, and celebrate those. But the notion of unity, I think, was actually much stronger than some of this tension that you reported on at the outset.
Let me ask you this, though. How do you make sure that yesterday wasn't a funeral for another era of politics? That this idea that, you know what, this is the Donald Trump style of politics is now how you win. And John McCain was trying to send the message, no, don't go down that road. How do you prevent yesterday from being essentially a memorial service for that?
Well, look, John McCain was a fighter. There's no doubt about that, right? And but he also was somebody who famously said that honesty, integrity is the core value, and keeping your word in the Senate. I actually believe that on a lot of issues there is bipartisanship in the way that Senator McCain has folks on.
I believe there is too.
It doesn't get reported on all the time. You know, you're going to have Amy Klobuchar on after me. She and I work together.
The president won't embrace it, though. It's the reason it's not getting reported on. The president won't embrace it, so you guys you're not doing it.
But let me give you a couple examples right now of bipartisanship that I think is important. That's a McCain and Trump area of focus. We just passed the National Defense Authorization Act. I think all 85 senators voted for that. That was a McCain-led bill on the Armed Services Committee. It was all about rebuilding the military. It was all about implementing a new strategy that the president has put out. That was very bipartisan. We're right now, and you follow this, Chuck, we're working on appropriations bills. First time since 1979 that we're actually getting appropriations bills, all of them done. That's Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. The president's been pushing that. Certainly John McCain was somebody who believed in that, on that part of regular order. So my point is that you're right. The message of working together, particularly in the memory of John McCain, is important. But I do think that a lot of that is happening. Yeah. And do we have principal differences on some issues? Absolutely we do, but a lot of those have been with us for a while.
How do you explain the president's behavior and how he comported himself this week in regards to John McCain?
Well, look, we know there's been tension between them. I would say that the Trump administration overall was very engaged. You had an important speech that the vice president gave at the ceremony of laying in state in the Dome. Yesterday, there was a number of folks from the administration.
You're trying to gloss over it. Why? Hey, this is the president of the United States.
Well, what I'm trying to, Chuck, I'm not trying to gloss over it. But here's what I think is more important. Yes, there was tensions between the president and John McCain. This week, though, has been all about John McCain and the unity of his vision of courage, of patriotism, of freedom, of service before self. And I think that's the lesson that we should take away from the week. That's what I want to, I think that's what the family wants.
What do you want President Trump to, what about President Trump? What should he take away from yesterday's service?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that the president can learn about. You know, look, the book on John McCain, his great life, it's been written, right? It's been written. But for all of us, you know, whether you, me, or the president, or other Americans who are watching that, you know, we're still an open book. And I think there's a lot of things all of us can do the president, myself, other Americans who are watching this, one of the things that John McCain was all about, he knew that he was not a perfect man. He knew he made mistakes. But as President Obama and President Bush emphasized yesterday, he was always looking for improvement and in himself, in his country. And I think that's something we can all take away, whether it's the president or anyone else watching these important, beautiful services.
All right, something else that the president said this week about the November elections. He said, and it was in a meeting with evangelicals, he said, if the GOP loses in November, quote, they will overturn everything quickly and violently. And then he added, these are violent people, referring to Democrats. Is that, is there any basis here?
No.
Do you understand what he's referring to?
I don't know.
Why is he speaking to evangelicals this way?
I have not seen that quote, and I don't think Democrats are violent people. What I do, and I haven't seen that quote. What I actually do think it's important for the president, other Republicans to talk about, I know you're going to talk in the panel this fall, is what we have accomplished, right? I mean, one thing that is very important for the American people, in addition, as I mentioned, rebuilding our military, is growing the economy. I mean, we are hitting an economy that is the strongest we've seen in decades. Consumer optimism up. Very high, 4.2% GDP growth. And these are because of policies. Policies of less government, more freedom, tax reform, regulatory reform. And Chuck, here's an important point. On the Democratic side, we're starting to see leaders being elected in primaries who have a very different view of the economy, more focused on even the idea of socialism. Let's have that debate in the fall. That's an important debate to have on the vision of growing the economy. I think our vision is working and it's strong.
Let me ask you a few questions that may come up in the next few months. Jeff Sessions, the current Attorney General, do you believe he's committed any fireable offenses?
I supported Jeff Sessions when he was nominated. I certainly voted for him, and I think he's doing a good job.
Do you think there's any reason for the president to remove him?
The president has the constitutional authority to remove him.
Do you think there's any fireable offense?
As I mentioned, he can do it. Would it be politically wise? I don't think so. And I support Jeff Sessions and the job he's doing right now.
You have been helping Brett Kavanaugh prepare for the confirmation hearing. You're also on Judiciary Committee. Let me just ask you.
I'm not on Judiciary.
I'm sorry about that. You were preparing him for that, but I conflated those two things. Let me ask you this. When he says he believes in precedent, all right, when we hear that, that's supposed to be code for he's not for overturning Roe v. Wade. Is that how people should interpret when he says he is a believer in precedent overall, that's what every American should take away, that Brett Kavanaugh does not want to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Look, I've known Brett Kavanaugh for a long time. I think he was an inspired choice. I think he'd make a great justice on the Supreme Court. He's been an outstanding Federal Circuit Court of Appeals judge. He's a man who's got a lot of humility, which, as you know, is kind of a rare quality in this town. I did talk to him about precedent, like Judge Gorsuch, now Justice Gorsuch. He actually wrote a book on it. He's been very focused on it. With regard to Roe v. Wade, I didn't get into the details when I met with him of asking about that.
Okay.
But I mean, so...
You see how silly this is, though, to average Americans? They don't understand why we can't get a simple answer to this question from Supreme Court nominees. And I know this is a thing on both sides of the aisle, but why can't we get an answer to this simple question about Roe v. Wade?
Which simple question?
Which is precedent? Does precedent equal meaning he doesn't want to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, I think he's going to be asked about this a lot during the whole week. So we're going to watch on that. But I think that he's focused. This isn't just Judge Kavanaugh. Justice Ginsburg, when she went through her confirmation hearing, she famously said, "I am not going to predict what may or may not come before the court because that would be prejudging it, and that's not the role of a judge." I do think on some key issues, Judge Kavanaugh, for example, his skepticism on the power and authority of federal agencies is something that we need on the court, something that is consistent with the Constitution. And these are questions he's going to be asked about, but I think he's going to make an outstanding justice.
Will he recuse himself on anything involving subpoenas involving the Mueller investigation?
I think he'll look at what the ethics are with regard to a Supreme Court justice. You know, there's been previous questions. Justice Kagan had a similar question on Obamacare-related litigation, and he'll do what the codes of conduct and ethics of a Supreme Court justice require.
Well, she did recuse herself on quite a few issues, so we'll see what he does there. Senator Sullivan, I'm going to leave it there, Republican from
Okay,
Alaska.
Chuck.
Thanks for coming on and
Great
sharing
to
your
be on the
views.
show. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.